Hey everyone, how's it going? Bowser the Healer here, and I have a very special guest. Today we're talking with senior game designer at Blizzard Entertainment, Graham Berger. He's the class designer for Evoker and has been working at Blizzard for 10 years, 8 of which have been in design. We're here to talk about Augmentation Evoker. Graham, what is up? How we doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm a little nervous, but I'm very excited.
Nah, this will be fun.
I think it will be. Just real quick, doing my little lore dive last night. Were you aware of the April Fool's Bard class first revealed back in 2008?
Yes. Yeah, I remember seeing that as a player back then and just being like, okay, that's ridiculous, but like I want to try it. So
yeah, for those of you who don't know, I'll have an image on screen of a Guitar Hero style interface that pops up to beat up monsters. This one screenshot in particular is going to be really funny when everyone sees it. For some, I think a support class has been a long time coming. So to start us off, I need to know, how long has Augmentation been in development? Was this idea more recent, or has it been in the slow cooker the whole time?
yeah, so Augmentation, when we first started kind of talking about Evoker way back before Dragonflight launched and coming up with the idea for this Draconic race class combo, one of the key things was, okay, we have the 5 Dragonflights. We have these 5 types of magic. How do we use all of them? And as we kind of dialed in what devastation and preservation were going to be with red and blue and green and bronze, black didn't fit either of those, and we wanted to keep each of them to kind of 2 main colors to, control complexity and kind of focus the themes of each. And we had a couple black spells in the core kit: Deep Breath, Obsidian Scales, Landslide, to make sure that all 5 were represented. But there was this question of like, what else can black do? And I think the most exciting part for the team was like, well, with the Drakthir, we have pure black dragon magic. In the past, we've seen, like Onyxia and Nefarian, they're using corrupted Shadow Flame stuff. But for the Drakthir, they're not Old God corrupted. They have whatever black draconic magic was meant to be. And so kind of started talking about, well, what are the things we could do with it? And we had a damage dealer, we had a healer, and the team kind of rallied around this idea of, well, we have bronze magic, there's so many things we can do with that, and we have the black magic to kind of dive into. Wouldn't it be cool if we used that in a way that we haven't done before? And knowing that we wanted to continue telling the story of the Drakthir through the content updates in Dragonflight, and that it would take us some more time to kind of figure out exactly what this third play style would be and figure out the details and answer the many questions we knew we had to get right to be able to kind of put it in the game. Augmentation was born as sort of this, like, we have this opportunity with the fantasy pieces and the story pieces to do something really different and something really new to WoW.
Visually, I'm a massive fan of the spec. From Dave Greco's artwork of the spec to the wonderful effects such as Upheaval and Breath of Eons. How did the team come up with it all? Were there any inspirations in particular?
Oh man, yeah, the art team does such a phenomenal job. When we saw the Talent Pain piece by Dave, like, we were just sharing it all over internally on our, Slack messaging and just being like, have you seen it? Did you see the thing? It's so cool. So super stoked. Even like the ability icons, I get unreasonably excited about ability icons because they're such, to me, such a core piece of like how players connect and remember what abilities are. I'm like, they got to look awesome. And the artist knocked those out of the park as well. Thematically, sort of, for an inspiration for bronze, it was drawing on what have we done for preservation. That visual kit had kind of been established, and so it was just continuing that style through. And when we're working with the artists and saying, hey, here's the ability we've designed, we really collaborate with them on what should it look like. Sometimes on the design side, we'll have an idea of like, oh, I'm kind of going for this thing, and then some abilities, it's I have this mechanic and I want it to look cool. What do you got? Please. So really a very collaborative process. And then black magic, similar, we'd established a bit of what that looked like I said, with Deep Breath or Obsidian Scales, but there was a lot more exploration there for them to do and kind of stretch their muscles on how do you make, I think a big challenge of Augmentation was like, how do you represent Ebon Might, Prescience, Inferno's Blessing, Spatial Paradox, Blistering Scales. How do you represent these myriad of buffs that can all be on a character at the same time and not have it look like a mess? Ebon Might, they did something really clever in that it kind of puts swirls around your upper arms, and that's not a space on the model that we've really utilized before. And it's like, oh, that's okay, yeah, because we know it's going to be up a lot of the time, but it, feels powerful, big biceps. So okay, that's really cool, and it's different and new. So um, yeah, just finding ways to kind of solve some of the problems that we created by putting all these spell effects on players at the same time, and then continuing to evolve that style that we'd established at launch with their other spells.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so great to hear. I never thought about like biceps with arms. I'm like, that's great. And speaking of Ebon Might, it is the core ability of Augmentation.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain more to the people how the move works and its origins, both from a gameplay perspective, but also maybe a lore perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ebon Might is a 30-second cooldown cast time spell, no resource cost, so it doesn't take essence, and it grants your 4 nearest allies some amount of their primary stat based on how much you have, and it prefers damage dealers. So in a dungeon setting, it'll just buff everyone in your dungeon group, and then in larger group settings, like a battleground or a raid, it will pick the 4 people who are physically nearest to you, but it will prioritize damage dealer roles over tanks or healers. So if you're in a raid, it'll pick 2 rogues and 2 mages, even if a holy priest is standing closer to you. That choice in particular was done because you are a damage dealer as Augmentation. That is the role you're fulfilling in a group setting, and so we want to make sure that when you're buffing people with these kind of potentially damage increasing effects, it is giving it to the individuals who are most going to add damage to the group by using them. Ebon Might lasts 10 seconds baseline. That is increased both by your mastery, Time Walker, just as you get more mastery, Ebon Might will last longer, and as you do most of your damaging abilities. So when you cast Eruption or Upheaval or Fire Breath, all of those add time to your existing Ebon Might with a passive called Sands of Time. And that's really the core loop of Augmentation, and kind of as we were trying things and iterating, what we narrowed in on was, okay, Ebon Might is this really big bonus to your damage dealing allies. We want you to focus there on if you can keep Ebon Might up as much as possible, you are going to be successful as Augmentation.
And one thing I noticed, and you touched on it, was the tooltip does say 4 nearest allies. And this separates it from Wind Fury, which is, while a 30-yard range, it's only to the people that the group the Enhancement Shaman's assigned to. Was there a particular reason for that choice?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a combination of a couple things. One is sort of from a organizational standpoint. If you're a raid leader, having to put one Enhancement Shaman in the Wind Fury group, and stack all the melee is like, okay, that's manageable. But the idea of, okay, we've introduced this new support playstyle, and you might have 2 or 3 of them, and now you have to organize kind of your entire raid layout in the window around Augmentation is like, that doesn't sound super fun to a lot of people. I think there are those who, enjoy that kind of minutia, but we want you to be able to show up and just play. Then the 4 nearest is, but with that damage dealer preference, was to add potential sort of depth and mastery to Augmentation. Like, you can just stand where you want and cast it, and it's fine. But if you have one person you're really trying to buff, or you're preferring the melee or ranged, it gives you some capability to control that and say, yeah, I want to make sure that this Windwalker always gets my primary stats, so I'm going to Verdant Embrace over to them before I Ebon Might every time, and give you some kind of control over who you're buffing.
Yeah, I really love that. I'm a huge fan of skill expression. I come from the fighting game world, and it's just to see something like that, I thought was just so neat. Breath of Eons, speaking of cool abilities, is one I'm looking forward to optimizing, both in Mythic Plus and in Raid. Could you give us some backstory into the 3rd major breath ability of Evoker and how it came about?
Breath of Eons went through many, many iterations.
Really?
we tried a lot of different stuff. Very early on, looking at devastation, preservation, we went, okay, we have deep breath, we have dream flight, we've got to do another, we call it a flyover for Augmentation, to have one. And for a long time, we tried a bunch of variants of it buffing your allies. You're flying over them and providing some sort of bonus to everyone you fly over, because that's sort of that seems like the sort of obvious choice. If you're a buff class, you should buff people with your flyover. That created a lot of kind of hard to solve problems. If you're in a raid and you fly over the raid and it buffs everybody, well, suddenly you're not an optional class anymore. Now it's the second Bloodlust, right? If Augmentation can just give the raid a damage boost, well, you kind of have to have one or more augmentations every time. Tried a whole bunch of variants of that, had trouble kind of squaring that circle in a way that wasn't incredibly complicated and didn't, end up in this massive tooltip or a bunch of hidden rules. And so pivoted to the version we see today, where it's a debuff on enemies. You can debuff as many enemies as you want, and then tying it into Ebb and Might to say, okay, now there is a tuning knob there. It is balanceable in larger group sizes. You can have multiple augmentation evokers, and that's totally okay. Because really, that was one of our biggest goals, was saying, yep, if you and your friend both want to play augmentation, you can. And so figuring out the right design for Breath of Eons was in service to that. Thematically, I mean, time magic, there's so much you can do with it. I think the kind of building up a temporal bomb and everyone seeing their own and getting those big crit explosions showing is just really exciting, kind of a group moment. And that big visual, it's like when an evoker's in your group, that's one of the things you really see is, oh, they just cast Breath of Eons, there's sand everywhere. Okay, time to pop off.
Yeah, you're always gonna know when that move goes off. It's so nice. So you've touched on this a little bit, but abilities like Spatial Paradox and Blistering Scales, moves that help the healers and the tanks respectively. Was the goal of Augmentations Kit always to support a tank healer DPS party?
Yeah, absolutely. It more broadly, one of our pillars for kind of designing the spec was that everyone in the group is excited that you're there, that they are group minded. We actually, designing Augmentation, kind of some of our first versions, and we're building all kinds of spells, we're putting things in the game one day and throwing them away the next, was much more sort of single target minded. It was more in the vein of pick one of your buddies and you're going to give them a pile of different effects and make them the all-star of the group. And it had two problems we ran into. One was everyone else in the group was sad, right? Why are they getting to be super powerful and I'm like over here doing my normal thing? And then the other was actually an approachability kind of difficulty concern of, if you're buffing one person, you have to know who is going to benefit the most from everything you're doing. Even if you're just joining a pug, there's this expectation of like, understand the other 38 specs in the game. And for this first introduction of a new play style, a new way of kind of engaging with your group, we wanted to make sure that it was really approachable and that it didn't have that burden of knowledge. Knowing all that stuff still benefits you as augmentation, right? Like you can single target prescience and some of the other abilities and kind of min-max in that way. But at a baseline, buffing everyone meant you don't have to know what everyone else can do in order to perform well in a group setting. So yeah, the spells like Blistering Scales and Spatial Paradox, like we want the tank and healer to be excited you're there. Even in a raid, we want them to be excited that an augmentation's in the group. And in a lot of ways, those abilities are some of the most fun to design because tank and healer value utility so highly in different scenarios. It's like, what's weird stuff we can do for them? So
yeah, I think giving someone 40 extra yards is wild. I wasn't prepared for how far away that felt. And it's
a lot. Yeah,
it's a lot. It's really cool. And by the way, is there anyone in particular I can give the high five to for making that flavorful cheat death ability?
Team effort, as most things are, but yeah, the idea of, again, I look at Preservation Bronze magic as being the very friendly version, a lot of rewinding time, and just how can I make everything go super smoothly. Augmentation is a little more manipulative, and that sounds more evil than I really mean it, but they're seeing like, how can you push the boundaries of time magic? How can you change fate in a way that is going to help us succeed at our overall goal? So yeah, killing your other you in another timeline, maybe a little dark, but it makes me laugh, so.
Okay, so for the viewers who don't know, Timeskip is a cooldown that jumps you through time, lowering your cooldowns, but it has a choice node after it on the talent tree. One talent makes the ability last a whole 1 second longer, and the other move turns it into a passive, reducing all cooldowns by, I think, 15% right now. Graham, how do...
we reduced it to 10% either this patch or last, but yeah.
Okay, fair enough. How do choice nodes like that come to fruition in development?
So, sort of two pieces usually, like lots of reasons, but for this one in particular, it was one, approachability, wanting that Timeskip is an additional button. I think there is a lot of depth and complexity in like, when is the right time to use it? Even at a baseline, let me get as many spells on cooldown and then pop this, but I need to make sure that I can stand still for 3 seconds to get full benefit out of it. That can be a lot, especially for a player new to the role, new to dealing damage. And so providing that passive option that says, okay, you're still getting the majority of the benefit here, but you don't have to learn a new ability, I think is really valuable for approachability, for learning the spec. And then overall choice nodes on talent trees is like customization, different builds, like letting players play they want to play. So I think those are always kind of awesome. Blistering Scales, the regenerative chitin, or Molten Blood is another example of, we could have just said, okay, here's a node you dump points into to increase the armor, but giving you that choice of, do I want to have less maintenance on this spell, or do I want to really lean into the timing of it and when do I apply it, I think is a cool playstyle choice and sort of complexity option in terms of how much do you want to focus on these different pieces of your kit.
Right, especially because in Mythic Plus, I might want that shield on Blistering Scales just because externals are great, right? But then in Raid, I might want to stop thinking about that because we probably have enough paint suppressions that I don't have to worry about it.
And in Mythic Plus, right, you have that downtime between packs to be like, okay, let me reapply it and put a shield on them for entering the next pack. In a Raid, unless the fight has an intermission or something, you don't have as much downtime. So having it just stack up on its own, I think is really helpful.
How many major iterations of a talent tree take place in the development process, if you had to guess?
Ooh, it varies. We've only made 39 of these things so far. For Augmentation, the first version we put in wasn't super far off from what we ended up with. The process for making them is, varies by who's working on it and kind of how much time we have to spend on it and that sort of thing. But for Augmentation, it was very much, we build the core kit first before the talent tree even exists. We build the Ebon Might and the Eruption and the Sands of Time and those things, and then say, okay, how will this fit into a talent tree? How do we make especially those initial choices guide players to the most important pieces of what they need to use, right? Putting Ebon Might right up at the top. And then kind of filling in the gaps and saying, okay, we've got the core pieces here and here and here, and we want to path kind of this way, and we want bronze things to sort of be themed over here and black to sort of be themed over here. And then, all right, we have 20 nodes worth of talents. We need another 30 or what have you. Let's design some stuff. And kind of throwing things in, and it comes in over the course of many weeks and months. We had a lot of kind of placeholder, just cool active here or healer ability here that eventually became Spatial Paradox. So it's not this clear cut like first, second, third version. It really is first version and then just changing it throughout the whole process. But certainly of the, however many nodes are on the tree now, 40-ish, I'm sure we threw away another 40 or more that we tried and either didn't like or were boring or didn't quite fit or weren't the right theme. And yeah, we try lots of stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool to hear. And then speaking of iterations, balance must have been very tough for the team, as it can be very easy to make or break a metagame with a class like Augmentation in all forms of content. How did you navigate that process? Did any ideas cross any lines that had to be scrapped?
So many. That was one of those questions we asked ourselves right at the beginning when we first started talking about doing this, was how do we balance this? How do we make sure that this fits into modern WoW and is something that we can adjust, is something that players can give us feedback on? And sort of a key requirement was, this isn't required. We're not adding a fourth role to the game. You don't queue as support, right? You're still queuing as a damage dealer. We don't want to see a Mythic Raid be like, yep, every Mythic Raid needs to have one Augmentation Evoker because they bring Bloodlust 2, that sort of thing. So a lot of abilities like that, these very powerful, like, what is the best expression of bronze magic? What if we did a, raid-wide time warp thing? Oh, no, we made that's Bloodlust. But those sorts of things kind of were on our paper design list and then got crossed off because that is making the spec required in a way that we don't think is healthy for the game overall. But then in terms of actual kind of numbers and tuning and balance, we built in a lot of tools for ourselves to tweak things. So the first is very much the target capping, right? We talked about Ebon Might and how it only hits 4 players. Ebon Might could have been the whole raid. Ebon Might could have been one person, but making it the other 4 works for a dungeon, and then we can adjust it in a raid, knowing that it's going to touch damage dealers instead of a tank, a healer, and 2 damage dealers. And to go inside with that is the passive that I think most players won't really read, and that's totally fine, called Closest Pletchmates, which says when you're not in a raid, Ebon Might and Breath of Eons are more powerful. That's another big piece, is, okay, when you're buffing 4 DPS versus 2 DPS, a tank, and a healer who don't have a full raid's worth of buffs, how do we adjust what you're providing to make sure that you're still giving the right amount? That passive is a big part of it. And then we have the PvP mult system, right? When you go into an arena or battleground or you're PvPing in the outer world, your abilities get turned up or down to kind of fit that scenario. So for Augmentation, we're actually taking an approach of increasing their personal damage fairly significantly in PvP and reducing the impacts of their buffs a bit. Because that's going to kind of fit how PvP plays out, which is so different from PvE. But make sure that they still have a place and still have the kind of play style and emotion of I'm buffing my friends, but be competitive, be balanced, and we'll continue to adjust those things as necessary.
Oh, that's actually so cool to hear. I was so interested in how that process took place. And Graham, was allowing players to use the Wormstone ability to snap mobs in Mythic Plus an intentional feature, or did I just ruin the great push?
Probably just ruined it. No, that ability is like one of the most exciting, and in a lot of ways, as a developer, one of the scariest, because it is this potentially very powerful, very nuanced utility thing that I fully anticipate players are going to do some weird stuff with. And I anticipate we're going to see some bugs in PTR that we have to, chase down and fix. So, no, that's one that we're really excited to see how players use it. And, I'm sure it's going to have some effect on Mythic Plus when an augmentation evoker is brought in. We'll have to, take a look at that and kind of iterate and tweak things as necessary. But no, I honestly excited to see what players can do with an ability that's so different from the other kind of capabilities they've had in the past.
Yeah, that's definitely an ability that most people I think would sleep on. And then I hear that and I'm like, hey, I bet you can do the Azure Vault snap with that. And that's exactly what I went and tested. So when it comes,
thanks for letting me know.
I got you. Sorry, everyone else. When it comes to balance and design, how much does Raid, Mythic Plus, and PvP enter the conversation?
Honestly, from day one. We're always thinking about all facets of the game. Augmentation, I think, kind of on paper, you look at something like Evoker Might and it buffs the 4 nearest, and it's like, oh, clearly this is a dungeon specialization only. But that's not the case for us. Dungeons are a very highly played part of the game, and so having Evoker Might fit that makes kind of our jobs easier. But then building those tools to adjust it up or down in other scenarios was one of our considerations from very early on. Of the idea of adding a specialization to the game that can only do one type of content, I think, is just sort of unthinkable for us. It's like, no, when you play the game, you have so many different ways to play, and your spec is just the lens through which you view the content you're excited for. So yeah, we got to make sure that augmentation can do everything in the game, and do it competitively, and fits with the kind of class compositions and the ways that people are playing the game today. So definitely something we think about super early on.
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear. And then I have to ask you personally, Graham, what do you like the most about your spec? It's your baby. As the lead designer for the class, is there any part in particular that you're proud of or that you love?
So augmentation, I will say, Evoker, Drakthir, Augmentation, all of World of Warcraft is this massive team effort. Like I'm really humbled to be able to sort of represent the team in interviews with you and things like that, and to be able to talk about it. But I could not have made this alone. I don't think anyone could have. It's a huge effort. Myself, other designers, our artists, engineers, all working together to make something super cool. And one of the advantages of, I think one of the strengths of the World of Warcraft team is we're all players. And so we playtest augmentation every week. We're running dungeons, we're doing PvP, and giving each other feedback and saying, hey, I tried this kind of build and it didn't super work, or, Wernstone, okay, when you're porting around Pillars in Arena, that's going to be pretty cool. So, and having, that back and forth with each other is super valuable. My favorite thing about augmentation, and it's a little cheesy, it's that I have played games with my guildies, with my friends for years, and I've seen other games that have this sort of play style where you're helping your friends. You're not a healer, you're not just saving your friends, but you're making them better, you're helping them reach their maximum potential. And so my friends who are excited for augmentation, now that's been announced, like seeing how hyped they're getting about like, okay, finally I can play the emotionally satisfying playstyle I've been wanting in WoW for so long. To me, that's just like, okay, we're doing it. That's the exciting part.
Oh, that's so good to hear. No, and of course it's a team effort, and I'm so happy to hear like just how much you all work together for this. The development process to me is so exciting. I have one more zinger for you before my outro, and it's when will I be able to be a panda for my visage form? Oh. Sorry, we'll save the hard ones for last,
No, great question. I think the team's always looking at kind of increasing the customization options available. Warlocks being able to be all of the races except Drakthir in Fractures in Time is a big part of that, right? Being a Lightforged Draenei Warlock, weird but cool. So I think it's just looking at kind of what is the best bang for the buck, what are players really asking for and really excited about. So Panda Visage form, not anytime soon, I'd say, but we're always talking about kind of the best things to add to the game for sure.
There you go. As long as I sent that out into the world. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we sign off?
I think we covered a lot of good stuff. Just, kind of, I want to make sure everyone knows when you log into Fractures in Time as an Evoker, Augmentation is available immediately. We do have some story questing with Emberthal and Abyssian to sort of understand where these powers came from and free Adamanthe and learn more about her, but you don't have to do that to play Augmentation. You can just log in and play.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for the interview. This was a blast.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
And also for all of you watching, hey, if you like this kind of content, get subscribed. I'm going to be playing a lot of Augmentation myself. And make sure you hit the like button. Let Blizzard know that you're hyped for this class. And I will see you all in the next one. Take care, friends. That's awesome. That's fantastic here. I also need 2 seconds. I'll be cutting this out. There's like lawnmowers everywhere. I have no idea what to do.